He hid an Apache warrior in his barn and returned with an army asking for her hand in marriage. It was a cold and stormy night on the outskirts of a quiet village. The wind howled through the trees, bending the branches until they creaked and groaned under the force. Rain fell in heavy sheets, drenching the land and turning the dirt roads into a slippery mess. In the midst of this storm, a humble farmer sat by the fireplace in his small wooden house. The fire cast dancing shadows on the walls, giving the room a strange, almost magical feel. Outside, his barn stood dark and silent, except for the occasional sound of the rain striking the roof. The farmer, a man named Samuel, had lived in this area for many years. He was known in the village as a quiet, honest, and hardworking man. He tended his fields during the day and cared for his animals with patience and dedication. Life was simple for him, though it was not without its challenges. He had learned to live with the isolation of the land, the harshness of the weather, and the unpredictability of nature. Still, he had a routine, and in this routine, nothing usually disturbed the peace of his evenings. But this night was different. As Samuel stared into the fire, he suddenly heard a faint noise coming from the direction of the barn. At first, he thought it was just the wind or a stray animal. The sound was too small to be a cow or a horse, and yet it was too deliberate to be ignored. He frowned and stood up, his heart beginning to beat a little faster. Something about the noise did not feel right. It was soft at first, like a whisper in the wind, but then he heard it clearly, a desperate sound, almost like a plea for help. Cautiously, Samuel grabbed a lantern from the table and wrapped his coat tightly around his shoulders. He opened the door and stepped into the storm. The rain immediately soaked him, but he didn't mind. His eyes scanned the darkness, searching for the source of the noise. The barn loomed ahead, a large wooden structure that had stood for decades. Its doors creaked in the wind, and for a moment Samuel hesitated. He knew that wandering into the barn in the middle of a storm could be dangerous, especially if there were animals inside. But the sound had returned, a soft cry, human this time, and he could not ignore it. He approached the barn slowly, lantern held high to cut through the darkness. As he reached the entrance, he noticed something unusual. The door, which was normally fastened with a heavy latch, was slightly ajar. Samuel's heart pounded. Whoever or whatever was inside might be in trouble, or they might bring trouble to him. But he had always been a man who helped others when he could. Turning back was not an option. Pushing the door open, Samuel was met with a rush of wind and the sharp smell of wet hay. He peered into the shadows, and that's when he saw her. She was crouched behind a stack of hay bales, barely moving, her dark hair plastered to her face from the rain. Her eyes were wide with fear, and Samuel could see that she was injured. There were cuts and bruises on her arms, and she seemed weak from exhaustion. Even in the dim light, he could tell she was not an ordinary young woman. There was something in her gaze, strength, courage, and a fierce determination to survive. "Are you okay?" Samuel asked gently, not wanting to startle her. She flinched but did not speak. She only stared at him, her breathing rapid and uneven. Samuel lowered the lantern slightly and knelt at a safe distance. He did not move too close, knowing that trust could not be forced. "It's all right. I won't hurt you," he said softly. The woman did not respond, but after a long moment she relaxed slightly. Samuel could see that she was alert, always watching, always calculating. She had clearly been trained to survive in dangerous situations. He realized that helping her would not be simple. She might not trust anyone, and anyone who tried to harm her could face consequences he could not imagine. Yet despite the risk, Samuel knew he could not leave her out there in the storm. Over the next few hours, Samuel worked quietly and carefully. He brought blankets and warm water, and with gentle hands, he cleaned the cuts on her arms and bandaged them as best as he could. She allowed him to help, but she never said a word. Her silence was not rudeness, it was caution, a way of protecting herself until she understood his intentions. Samuel respected that. He worked patiently, talking to her in a calm voice, explaining each step so she would not be frightened. By the time the storm began to ease, she had rested slightly, her breathing steadier and her eyes clearer. Samuel could see the gratitude in her gaze, even if she did not express it in words. He realized that she was more than just a stranger in need of help. She was someone who had survived battles and hardships that he could barely imagine. The respect he felt for her grew with each passing moment. He decided that she could not stay in the house. It was too risky if anyone from the village discovered her presence. Samuel led her to the barn, where he had cleared a small area with hay and blankets. It was modest, but it would provide shelter and warmth. He made sure she had water and some food, and then he stepped back, giving her space. "You can rest here," he said. "You are safe for now. No one will find you here." The woman nodded slightly, a rare sign of acknowledgement, and settled down among the hay. Samuel felt a mix of emotions: relief because she was safe, fear because hiding her could bring danger, and curiosity because there was much he did not know about her. Who was she? How had she come to be in such peril? And why had fate brought her to his barn on that stormy night? That night, Samuel stayed awake in his house, listening to the occasional sound of movement in the barn. The rain continued to fall, but the storm outside seemed less frightening now that he had done what he could to help. He thought about the bravery of the woman he had sheltered and wondered what challenges she had faced to get here. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose beyond his fields and animals. His life, which had been simple and quiet, now held a new mystery, a story that was just beginning to unfold. The hours passed slowly, but Samuel did not mind. He kept watch, ready to protect her if necessary. He knew that this encounter would change both of their lives forever. In the stillness of that night, surrounded by the storm and the shadows of the barn, a silent bond formed between the farmer and the Apache warrior. It was a bond built not on words, but on trust, respect, and the courage to care for someone in need, even when danger lurked close by. By the time dawn broke, the storm had passed, leaving the fields glistening with rain and the air fresh and clean. Samuel approached the barn and saw the woman awake, looking out at the rising sun. There was a quiet strength in her posture, a confidence that she would face whatever came next. Samuel realized that he had witnessed something extraordinary, a survivor, a warrior, and perhaps a future friend who would forever change the course of his life. And so, the story of that stormy night began, a story of courage, compassion, and the beginning of an extraordinary journey that neither Samuel nor the Apache warrior could have imagined. Days passed after that stormy night, and life on Samuel's farm slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. Yet the presence of the Apache warrior in his barn had changed everything. Samuel found himself constantly thinking about her, not in a romantic way, but in awe of her courage, her intelligence, and the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her. She had barely spoken since arriving, but her eyes told stories of battles fought, hardships endured, and a life far different from his own. In the mornings, Samuel continued his routine of tending to the animals and working in the fields, but now he also made sure to check on her. He would quietly bring her warm water, fresh blankets, and simple food, leaving them in the barn so she could eat and rest without feeling pressured. At first, she observed him from a distance, cautious and wary. Samuel knew trust was not something that could be forced. It had to be earned. Over time, they began to communicate in small ways. Simple gestures became their language. A nod, a pointed finger, or a hand motion could convey meaning. Samuel learned to read her expressions and the subtle ways she moved. She, in turn, began to recognize his kindness, patience, and respect for her space. Slowly, the silence between them became comfortable. It was a quiet companionship, built on mutual respect rather than words. One morning, as the sun rose over the fields and the mist hung low over the ground, Samuel brought her a bundle of fresh bread and some cheese. She looked at the food, then at him, and for the first time she smiled. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. Samuel felt a warmth in his chest that he had not felt in years. He realized that even without words, a bond was forming, a bond of understanding, care, and trust. As the days turned into weeks, the Apache warrior regained her strength. She began to move more freely, tending to small tasks around the barn. She helped stack hay, care for the animals, and even repair fences. Samuel was amazed at her skill and determination. She approached every task with precision and focus, as if nothing could shake her concentration. He could see that she was not just surviving, she was thriving. Despite her growing comfort, she remained cautious. Samuel understood that she had been through hardships that no ordinary person could imagine. She had been trained to survive in dangerous situations, and trust did not come easily. But her wariness slowly gave way to curiosity. She watched Samuel as he worked, noting the way he cared for his animals, the way he nurtured the land, and the quiet strength that seemed to define his life. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Samuel decided to try something new. He sat on the edge of the barn's hay pile, motioning for her to come closer. She hesitated, but after a moment she stepped forward. He held out a small notebook and a pencil, hoping they could begin to communicate more clearly. At first, she only watched him, unsure of the purpose. Then slowly, she picked up the pencil and began to write. Through the notebook, she revealed pieces of her story. Her name, Samuel learned, was Ayanna. She had been part of a group of warriors who protected her people and land, but a sudden attack had forced her to flee. She had been separated from her family and had been on the run ever since, avoiding capture and danger at every turn. Samuel listened carefully, absorbing every word. He could feel the weight of her experiences, the courage it must have taken to survive on her own. As they shared their stories, Samuel began to open up as well. He told her about his life on the farm, the simplicity of his days, and the challenges he faced alone. Ayanna listened attentively, and though she did not speak much, her eyes conveyed understanding. She seemed to respect his honesty and appreciated the simplicity of his life. Samuel realized that despite their very different worlds, they shared common values: resilience, honesty, and a deep respect for life. With trust growing between them, Samuel noticed changes in Ayanna's behavior. She no longer flinched at every sound or hid in the shadows of the barn. She began to laugh quietly at small things, a sound that was rare but beautiful. She even tried to teach Samuel some of her survival skills, showing him how to move quietly, notice small signs in the land, and think ahead in uncertain situations. Samuel found these lessons fascinating, even if he sometimes struggled to follow her techniques. One afternoon, while working in the fields, a group of crows caught Ayanna's attention. She pointed toward the sky, and with a small gesture, indicated that Samuel should watch. She showed him how the movements of the birds could signal changes in the weather or the approach of others. Samuel was amazed at her knowledge of nature and the way she could interpret subtle signs. He realized that Ayanna's skills were not just about survival, they were about understanding the world in a deeper way. As the weeks went by, their bond grew stronger. Samuel began to feel a sense of purpose he had never known before. He had always cared for his farm and animals, but now he also cared deeply for Ayanna's safety and well-being. He became more attentive, cautious, and thoughtful in his actions, always considering how they might affect her. In return, Ayanna showed signs of trust and even affection, small gestures that spoke volumes without needing words. Despite this growing closeness, Samuel knew that their time together could not last forever. Ayanna was not meant to remain hidden indefinitely. Her people were out there, and the dangers she had fled from were still very real. He feared the day she would have to leave, but he also knew that he could not stop her from reclaiming her life and returning to her people. It was a difficult thought, one that weighed heavily on his mind, but he understood that true kindness meant letting go when necessary. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned a deep shade of purple, Samuel and Ayanna sat outside the barn, watching the fields bathed in the soft light. They did not speak much, but the silence was comfortable. It was a silence filled with understanding, respect, and the quiet recognition of the bond they had formed. Samuel knew that their connection was extraordinary, and he could feel the strength and wisdom radiating from Ayanna. In the days that followed, Samuel continued to help Ayanna recover fully, while she helped him in ways he had never imagined. She taught him new skills, shared her knowledge of the land, and helped him think differently about the world around him. Samuel realized that he was learning as much from her as she was from him. Their relationship had become a partnership of trust, respect, and mutual admiration. Though challenges remained, the farm had become a place of safety and refuge. Ayanna no longer hid in fear, and Samuel no longer felt the loneliness that had defined his life for so long. Together, they had created a small world where trust, courage, and kindness flourished. It was a fragile world, but it was theirs, a world built on understanding, compassion, and the extraordinary bond between a humble farmer and a courageous warrior. And so, as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the story of Samuel and Ayanna continued to unfold. Each day brought new lessons, new challenges, and new moments of connection. They had survived the storm, both outside and within themselves, and now they faced a future filled with uncertainty, but also with hope, trust, and the knowledge that together they could face anything. The quiet bond that had begun in the barn during a stormy night had grown into something extraordinary. It was not a story of romance, at least not yet. It was a story of trust, respect, courage, and the remarkable way that two very different lives could intersect and change forever. And while neither Samuel nor Ayanna could have predicted the events that would follow, one thing was certain. The time they spent together in those early days had created a foundation that could withstand anything that lay ahead. As the weeks turned into months, Samuel and Ayanna's bond grew stronger. Each day, Samuel noticed her strength, intelligence, and courage. She no longer seemed afraid of the farm or its animals. In fact, she moved through the barn and fields with confidence, handling the chores as if she had lived on a farm her whole life. Yet even as she grew comfortable, a tension lingered in her eyes, a quiet reminder that she did not truly belong in this safe haven. Samuel had come to care deeply for her. He admired her resilience, her sharp mind, and her ability to face danger without fear. But he also understood that sheltering her was only a temporary solution. The outside world remained dangerous, and he knew she could not stay hidden forever. Her people, her past, and the enemies she had fled from were all still out there. Ayanna's safety depended on returning to her own world, and Samuel wrestled with the idea that letting her go was the right thing, even though it would leave him feeling empty. One morning, the air crisp and cool with the first hints of autumn, Samuel noticed that Ayanna had begun spending more time near the edges of the property, looking toward the horizon. She did not speak of leaving, but her gaze and the tension in her body told him that she was preparing herself for something. Samuel felt a mix of pride and anxiety. He was proud of her strength and determination, yet anxious about what might happen if she left. He decided it was time to confront the inevitable. One evening, as the sky turned a soft shade of pink and gold with the setting sun, he approached the barn. Ayanna was tending to the animals, her movements fluid and precise. He watched her for a moment, admiring her grace and focus, then spoke softly. "Ayanna, I think it's time to talk about the future. You can't stay hidden here forever. Your people, your family, they are out there. You belong with them." Ayanna paused, her hands stilling as she turned to face him. Her eyes, usually calm and unreadable, now reflected a storm of emotions: fear, hesitation, and longing. She had grown to trust Samuel and she valued his opinion, but the thought of returning to the world she had fled from filled her with uncertainty. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Instead, she nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth in his words. Over the next several days, they prepared for her departure. Samuel collected supplies, food, water, blankets, and some basic tools that she might need on her journey. He also worked to make sure the farm would remain safe in her absence. Every task was done carefully, with the knowledge that this act of kindness might be the last gesture they shared before parting. Gianna, in turn, prepared herself mentally and physically. She trained her body, tested her strength, and reviewed the survival skills that had always kept her alive. During these preparations, their communication deepened. They shared more stories, more lessons, and more quiet moments together. Samuel taught her about farming, the cycles of the land, and the habits of the animals. She taught him about survival, observation, and patience in dangerous situations. Their relationship was a partnership built on mutual respect, trust, and admiration. Though neither of them spoke of it, a subtle sense of care and attachment had formed, making the thought of separation even more difficult. One night as they sat together outside the barn, the moon casting a silver glow across the fields, Samuel asked, "Do you ever fear what will happen out there?" Gianna considered the question, her eyes reflecting the light of the moon. "I fear nothing I cannot face," she said quietly, "but I fear losing what I have found here. You have shown me kindness I have never known." Samuel's heart swelled. He realized that their bond was more than survival or convenience. It was a rare connection, forged through shared experiences, trust, and compassion. The day of departure finally arrived. Samuel and Ayanna woke early, the air filled with the crisp scent of morning. Samuel had packed everything carefully, and Ayanna moved with purpose, carrying the supplies and checking their condition. The moment was quiet but heavy with unspoken emotions. Neither of them spoke much as they walked toward the edge of the property, where the fields met the forest. Samuel's hands shook slightly as he handed her the last of the supplies. "Take care," he said, his voice steady but soft. "And remember, you are never alone." Yana's eyes softened as she looked at him. She reached out, briefly touching his arm, a simple gesture yet full of meaning. "I will never forget," she said. Then, without another word, she turned and disappeared into the forest, moving with the grace and speed of someone trained to survive. Samuel watched her go, a mixture of relief, pride, and sorrow filling his chest. He knew she was safe for now, but the journey ahead would be perilous. For the next several days, Samuel worried constantly. Every noise in the distance made him tense. He feared that Ayanna would encounter danger, that her enemies might find her, or that she would suffer in some way. Yet, he also knew he had done everything he could to prepare her. His role now was to hope and wait, to trust in her skills, and to believe that her courage and intelligence would guide her safely. Then, one evening, as the sun began to set and the village settled into quiet, a distant sound broke the stillness. The sound of hooves pounding the ground, a rhythmic, powerful motion that grew louder by the second. Samuel's heart raced as he moved to the edge of the property, trying to see through the trees. And there in the fading light he saw them, a group of riders, strong and confident, moving toward the farm with purpose. At the front of the group was Ayanna, riding tall and proud, her presence commanding attention. She was not alone. Her people surrounded her, an army of warriors who respected and followed her. Samuel's mind raced. Had she returned for vengeance, or was this some message of war? As they drew closer, Ayanna raised her hand, signaling the group to stop. She looked directly at Samuel, her eyes steady, calm, and full of meaning. The riders dismounted, surrounding Samuel in a respectful formation. Ayanna stepped forward, her expression serene but powerful. She explained, through gestures and simple words, that she had returned not for conflict, but to honor the man who had saved her life. Samuel listened in disbelief as she recounted his kindness, his courage, and the safe haven he had provided when the world had been harsh and cruel. His heart swelled with a mixture of pride, humility, and amazement. The group of warriors, seeing their leader's respect for Samuel, bowed slightly, showing that they understood the importance of his actions. They did not seek revenge, nor did they seek conflict. Instead, they came to honor a man who had shown extraordinary kindness to someone in need. Samuel felt a sense of awe. He had never imagined that a simple act of compassion could lead to such a profound moment. Yana turned to Samuel and spoke with clarity, her voice strong yet gentle. "You have risked your life for me," she said. "You have shown courage, kindness, and honor. My people and I will never forget what you have done. And now there is something we wish to ask of you." Samuel's mind raced, unsure of what could come next. He had helped her out of humanity, not expecting anything in return. Yet here she was, standing tall, leading her people, and offering him a gift he had never imagined. That night, as the sun disappeared, and the sky filled with stars, Samuel realized that the story of his quiet life had changed forever. Yana's journey, their bond, and the extraordinary events of the past months had led to a moment of recognition, respect, and honor that went far beyond anything he had expected. He understood that kindness, courage, and humanity had bridged two very different worlds, creating a connection that would last a lifetime. And so the stage was set for the next chapter of their lives, a chapter filled with uncertainty, hope, and the remarkable power of trust and compassion. Samuel had hidden a warrior in his barn, but he had also opened the door to a world he could never have imagined, a world where courage, honor, and humanity intertwined in the most unexpected ways. The days after Yana's return were unlike anything Samuel had ever experienced. The once quiet farm was now alive with movement, the sounds of horses' hooves, and the quiet murmurs of warriors. Samuel felt a mix of awe, pride, and anxiety. He had never imagined that his humble life would intersect with someone so extraordinary, let alone bring a group of respected warriors to his doorstep. Yana moved through the farm with a sense of purpose, her presence commanding yet calm. She did not rush or shout, but everything around her seemed to respond to her quiet authority. The warriors who accompanied her were disciplined and respectful, clearly recognizing her leadership. Samuel observed them closely, amazed at the organization, skill, and focus they displayed. Though he felt a little intimidated by the sudden shift in his world, he trusted Yana. He had seen her courage, intelligence, and sense of honor, and he knew she would not allow harm to come to him or his property. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Yana gathered the group around her. Samuel, standing a short distance away, could see the pride in her eyes and the seriousness in her expression. She spoke calmly, and though he could not understand all the words, the tone conveyed respect and determination. Slowly, one of the warriors stepped forward, speaking in simple words Samuel could comprehend. They explained that Yana had returned not with anger or vengeance, but to honor him for the courage and kindness he had shown. Samuel's heart swelled. He had helped her because it was the right thing to do, never expecting recognition or reward, and yet here he was, being acknowledged in the most extraordinary way. The next hours were filled with a flurry of activity. The warriors inspected the land, ensuring it was safe and secure. They treated the animals with care, demonstrating respect for Samuel's work. Samuel noticed how Yana moved among them, offering guidance and showing a calm authority that commanded trust without fear. The entire scene was surreal, a humble farm transformed into a meeting place of honor, respect, and extraordinary tradition. As the day progressed, Samuel and Yana were able to speak more openly. She shared stories of her people, her family, and the challenges she had faced during her time away. Samuel listened intently, absorbing every word. He learned that her people had always respected courage, honesty, and honor, and that his actions had reflected these values in the most remarkable way. Yana explained that in their culture, a person who shows extraordinary kindness and bravery can be honored not just by words, but through gestures that symbolize deep respect. Samuel felt humbled and overwhelmed by the significance of what was happening. Late in the afternoon, Ayanna led Samuel to a quiet spot near the edge of the property. The warriors had formed a respectful circle around them, giving them space yet remaining close enough to observe. Ayanna turned to Samuel, her eyes shining with sincerity and purpose. She explained that in her culture, gratitude and respect were often expressed in ways that might seem unusual to outsiders. Samuel listened carefully, realizing that he was about to witness something truly unique, an act of recognition that went far beyond anything he could have imagined. One of the warriors stepped forward, holding a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Yana gestured for Samuel to open it. Inside were symbols of honor, simple yet powerful representations of respect, courage, and loyalty. Samuel's hands trembled slightly as he held them, understanding the weight of the gesture. He had saved a life, shown kindness, and yet the ripple effect of his actions had reached far beyond what he had ever expected. This was not about reward or recognition in the usual sense. It was about values, integrity, and humanity. The group of warriors then performed a ritual that Samuel did not fully understand but could feel deeply. Their movements were precise, disciplined, and filled with meaning. Ayanna led the ceremony, her presence commanding yet gentle. Samuel watched, awed, as this community expressed respect in a way that felt both foreign and profoundly touching. He realized that the bond between him and Ayanna, forged in a stormy barn months ago, had grown into something far greater, a connection between worlds, cultures, and values. As the ceremony ended, Ayanna stepped closer to Samuel, her voice calm and deliberate. She explained that her people wished to honor him not just for the act of saving her, but for the character he had shown throughout their time together. She told him that in their tradition, acts of courage and kindness could lead to a lifelong alliance, a bond of respect that extended beyond simple gratitude. Samuel felt his heart pound. He had never imagined that a simple act of helping someone in need could carry such profound consequences. The warriors began to depart slowly, one by one, leaving Samuel and Ayanna alone for a moment. The farm returned to a quiet state, though it was different now. The air seemed charged with energy, respect, and the understanding that something extraordinary had occurred. Samuel turned to Ayanna, his mind racing with questions. I don't know what to say," he admitted. "I did what anyone would have done. I never expected any of this." Yana smiled softly, placing a hand on his arm. "You did not act out of expectation or reward," she said. "You acted out of courage, honesty, and compassion. That is why this moment matters. That is why my people and I honor you." Samuel felt a warmth spread through his chest. For months, he had acted quietly, helping and protecting, never seeking recognition. And yet, the recognition he received now was far more meaningful than anything he could have imagined. As evening fell, Samuel and Ayanna walked together through the fields. The sun had set, casting long shadows and painting the sky with shades of purple and gold. They spoke quietly, reflecting on the events of the day. Samuel realized that Ayanna's return had changed not just his life, but his understanding of the world. He had witnessed courage, honor, and respect in a form he had never known, and he felt deeply grateful for the experience. Ayanna, too, seemed reflective. She had returned not for revenge or conflict, but to honor a man whose actions had demonstrated values she held dear. She had seen courage in his eyes, integrity in his actions, and compassion in his heart. By coming back with her people, she had shown that trust and respect could transcend distance, culture, and circumstance. Together, they had created a moment of extraordinary meaning, one that neither would ever forget. That night, As Samuel lay in bed, he thought about the journey that had brought them to this point. A stormy night, a hidden barn, and a simple act of kindness had set in motion events that he could never have imagined. He realized that the world was far larger and more interconnected than he had ever known. Courage, compassion, and trust could create bonds stronger than fear, stronger than distance, and stronger than time. By morning, the farm had returned to a quiet rhythm, though it was a different kind of quiet. Samuel continued his daily work, but now with a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that his life had changed, not because of wealth, power, or fame, but because of the extraordinary connection he had formed with Ayanna and her people. The bond between them was built on trust, respect, and the shared understanding of courage and humanity. Ayanna spent the following days preparing to return fully to her people. She trained, organized, and ensured that her warriors were ready for the journey back. Samuel assisted when he could, providing supplies and advice based on his knowledge of the land. Though the thought of her leaving filled him with a quiet sadness, he understood that her place was with her people. He had given her safety and care, but her life was hers to reclaim. Finally, the day came for Ayanna to lead her people back to their home. Samuel stood at the edge of the property, watching as the warriors mounted their horses and prepared to depart. Ayanna approached him one last time, her eyes filled with gratitude and respect. "You have changed my life," she said softly, "and I will never forget you. What you have done for me, it is beyond words." Samuel nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. He had never been good with words, but he knew that the bond they shared was stronger than any words could convey. As the group rode away, Samuel watched them disappear into the distance, the sun rising behind them and casting a golden glow over the fields. He felt a mixture of pride, awe, and a quiet sense of loss. The extraordinary events of the past months had shown him that courage, kindness, and trust could create connections that transcended the ordinary. And though Ayanna and her people were gone, the lessons, memories, and bond they had shared would remain with him forever. In the days and weeks that followed, Samuel often reflected on that remarkable time. He continued his work on the farm, tending to his animals and fields, but his perspective had changed. He saw the world differently now, more connected, more complex, and full of possibilities. He knew that acts of kindness and courage, no matter how small, could have consequences far beyond what anyone could imagine. And he knew, deep in his heart, that the bond he had formed with Ayanna was something extraordinary, something that would endure, no matter the distance or the passage of time. And so the farm returned to its quiet routine, but it was a quiet full of meaning, full of memories, and full of hope. Samuel had hidden a warrior in his barn, and in doing so had witnessed courage, honor, and humanity in their purest forms. He had learned that true heroism often comes in simple, unexpected moments, and that the connections we make can shape the course of our lives in ways we cannot predict. After Ayanna and her people returned to their homeland, life on Samuel's farm seemed quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet, one filled with meaning, reflection, and a sense of anticipation he could not quite explain. Samuel continued his daily routines, tending to the animals, working the fields, and maintaining his home. Yet his thoughts often wandered to Ayanna, wondering how she and her people were faring, and whether the bond they had formed would endure across the distance. One crisp morning, as Samuel worked in the barn, he noticed movement on the horizon. At first he thought it might be travelers or villagers passing by, but as he looked more closely, his heart began to race. Ayanna was returning, but this time she was not alone. Riding at the front of a large group was Ayanna herself, her posture proud, her expression calm and commanding. Behind her were dozens of warriors, all riding in perfect formation, their presence both impressive and respectful. The air seemed to hum with purpose, and Samuel knew instantly that this was no ordinary visit. Gianna and her group approached the farm carefully, keeping a respectful distance at first. Samuel felt a mix of awe and curiosity. He had never seen such an organized, disciplined group outside of stories or distant lands, yet here they were, on his property. As they drew closer, Samuel realized the true reason for their arrival. Gianna had returned not for conflict, but to honor him in a way he could never have imagined. The very presence of her people signified respect, loyalty, and recognition far beyond words. The warriors dismounted, forming a wide circle around Samuel and Ayanna. Samuel could feel the weight of their gaze, not threatening, but full of reverence. He realized that in their culture, actions mattered more than words, and they were here to show their appreciation for the courage, honesty, and kindness he had shown. Gianna stepped forward, her eyes meeting Samuel's with a calm intensity. She explained that in their traditions, the deeds of an individual could earn respect not only from one person, but from an entire community. Samuel listened, humbled, unable to fully express the mixture of gratitude and awe he felt. As the day unfolded, the warriors performed a series of ceremonial gestures that Samuel did not fully understand, yet he felt the power and significance of every movement. Gianna led them, explaining each step with clarity and precision. Samuel observed, amazed, as this group of people honored him in a way that transcended language and culture. It was not just a recognition of his actions, it was a statement about character, courage, and the impact of kindness. For the first time in his life, Samuel felt truly seen and respected by people whose world was far different from his own. Then came the moment that would change Samuel's life forever. Gianna approached him once more, this time accompanied by her father, a leader of her people. The elder's presence was commanding, yet filled with a quiet dignity. Gianna spoke on his behalf, explaining that Samuel had shown qualities their culture revered: strength, integrity, and compassion, and that such qualities could not go unrecognized. Samuel's heart pounded as he listened, realizing that this moment was far more profound than any act of gratitude he had ever witnessed. The elder made a gesture that Samuel would never forget. He extended his hand and, through Ayanna's interpretation, formally requested Samuel's hand in marriage to Ayanna. The proposal was not demanding or forceful. It was an invitation, a sign of respect, and a way to honor both Samuel's courage and Ayanna's agency. Samuel was stunned. He had never expected that the simple act of helping someone in need could lead to such a monumental turning point in his life. He felt a mixture of awe, humility, and wonder at the journey that had brought them to this moment. Gianna looked at Samuel, her eyes calm but filled with meaning. She explained that in her culture, marriage was not only about love, but also about trust, respect, and partnership. By offering this, her people were acknowledging the bond that had grown between them, the courage Samuel had shown, and the honor he had earned. Samuel realized that their relationship had become something extraordinary, built on shared values, deep respect, and mutual admiration. Over the next few hours, Samuel and Ayanna spent time together, discussing the future. They spoke through gestures, words, and shared understanding. Samuel learned more about her culture, traditions, and values, gaining insight into a world far different from his own. Gianna shared her hopes for their future together, emphasizing partnership, respect, and unity. Samuel listened attentively, his heart full of gratitude and excitement. He understood that this union was more than personal. It was a bridge between worlds, a symbol of trust, honor, and mutual respect. As evening approached, the warriors prepared to depart, leaving Samuel and Ayanna together. The farm, once quiet and ordinary, now felt alive with significance. Samuel looked at the fields, the barn, and the animals, realizing how much his life had changed. A simple act of kindness, a decision to help someone in need, had set in motion events that would shape his destiny forever. He had hidden a warrior in his barn, but in doing so, he had also opened the door to a future filled with honor, unity, and extraordinary opportunity. That night, as Samuel and Ayanna sat together under the stars, they reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Samuel thought about the stormy night when he first discovered her in the barn, the weeks of quiet trust and companionship, and the moments of courage and understanding that had defined their relationship. He realized that every decision, every act of kindness, and every moment of trust had led to this incredible day. Ayanna, too, reflected on the journey. She had faced danger, loss, and uncertainty, yet she had found safety, trust, and respect with Samuel. She had learned that courage could be found in unexpected places, and that kindness and integrity could transcend cultures, lands, and even languages. Together, they had created a bond that was rare, powerful, and enduring. The days that followed were filled with preparation and celebration. Samuel learned more about Ayanna's people, their customs, and their values. He participated in ceremonies, shared meals, and deepened his understanding of the extraordinary culture he had been welcomed into. Ayanna, in turn, learned more about the simple yet meaningful life of the farm, appreciating the honesty, patience, and humility that defined Samuel's world. Together, they built a foundation for their future, one rooted in respect, trust, and shared values. The community around the farm, once distant and indifferent, now watched in awe and respect. Samuel had proven that courage, kindness, and integrity could create bonds that crossed boundaries, cultures, and expectations. His story became an example for others, showing that even the simplest acts of compassion could lead to extraordinary outcomes. People in the village began to see the power of trust, bravery, and humanity in a new light, inspired by the journey of a humble farmer and a courageous warrior. As the seasons changed, Samuel and Ayanna's relationship deepened. They worked side by side, sharing responsibilities, making decisions together, and building a life that honored both their worlds. Samuel learned new skills from Ayanna, while she adapted to the rhythm of farm life. They laughed, learned, and supported each other, creating a partnership based on equality, respect, and shared purpose. Their bond was not built on convenience or circumstance, but on the extraordinary connection forged through trust, courage, and mutual admiration. Years later, Samuel would look back on the night he discovered Ayanna in the barn and marvel at how one simple act of kindness had changed his life forever. He had hidden a warrior, nurtured trust, and shown compassion, and in return, he had been honored, respected, and given the chance to build a life filled with love, purpose, and extraordinary connection. The story of that stormy night, the quiet days of trust, and the remarkable return of Ayanna and her people would remain with him always, a reminder that courage, kindness, and humanity could bridge even the widest divides. And so, the story concluded not with an ending, but with a beginning. Samuel and Ayanna's lives had been forever intertwined through acts of courage, compassion, and trust. Together, they had built a future filled with hope, honor, and extraordinary possibilities, a life that neither could have imagined, yet one that felt perfectly natural after all they had shared. Their story became a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of trust, and the enduring impact of choosing to do what is right, even when the path is uncertain.